In the heart of the dense, ancient woods, where sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, stood the old abandoned house. Its weathered boards creaked in the gentle breeze, a testament to its years of neglect and solitude. The locals whispered of its haunted past, of restless spirits and forgotten secrets buried within its crumbling walls. On a crisp autumn evening, as the shadows lengthened and the forest echoed with the calls of nocturnal creatures, a piercing scream shattered the eerie silence. It echoed through the trees, a desperate cry for help that went unanswered in the desolate wilderness. By morning, news spread like wildfire through the small town nestled at the edge of the woods. A murder had been discovered in the old house. The authorities arrived swiftly, their cars crunching on the gravel path that led to the overgrown yard. Yellow tape cordoned off the area, marking it as a crime scene. Inside, the scene was grim and unsettling. The victim lay sprawled on the dusty floor, bathed in the cold light that filtered through broken windows. A prominent figure in the community, the victim's face was frozen in a mask of terror, eyes wide and accusing. Detectives combed through the decrepit rooms, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper clues to the perpetrator who had violated the house's long-held silence. Dusty furniture and faded wallpaper bore witness to a struggle that had taken place, the signs of a violent confrontation that had turned deadly. Outside, under the watchful gaze of ancient trees that seemed to guard their secrets jealously, neighbors gathered in hushed clusters. Speculations and rumors swirled like leaves caught in a storm. Some spoke of shadows seen moving in the night, of strange lights flickering in the windows of the abandoned house. Others murmured of long-held grudges and whispered threats. As dusk settled once more over the forest, the mystery deepened. The abandoned house stood silent and forbidding, its secrets buried within its decaying walls. The investigation would continue, driven by the determination to unravel the truth behind the murder in the old abandoned house in the woods, and to bring justice to the victim whose voice had been silenced in the darkness. Detective Sarah Anders leaned against her car, the cold metal offering a stark contrast to the warmth of her breath in the chilly autumn air. She surveyed the scene with a practiced eye, taking in the details that might offer a glimpse into the tragic events that had unfolded here. Sarah was no stranger to murder investigations, but this one felt different. The atmosphere surrounding the old abandoned house was heavy with history and whispers of the supernatural. She glanced up at the looming trees, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers against the fading light of the day. Inside the house, her team worked diligently, collecting evidence and photographing the scene. Forensic specialists moved with precision, documenting every bloodstain, every overturned piece of furniture. Sarah approached one of the officers who was dusting for fingerprints near the shattered remains of a window. "Any leads yet?" she asked, her voice quiet in the stillness of the house. The officer shook his head, a grim expression on his face. "Not much to go on yet, detective. No signs of forced entry, no murder weapon found. It's like the perpetrator vanished into thin air." Sarah frowned, her mind racing through the possibilities. The lack of evidence pointed to a skilled criminal or someone intimately familiar with the house. She knew they needed to tread carefully. Emotions ran high in cases like this, and missteps could derail the investigation. As night descended fully, casting deeper shadows across the forest, Sarah stepped outside to catch her breath. She pulled out her notebook and flipped through the pages, reviewing the list of potential suspects and witnesses they needed to interview. The victim, a prominent figure in town, had connections that reached far and wide. Friends and enemies alike would need to be scrutinized. A rustling in the underbrush nearby caught her attention. Sarah tensed, her hand instinctively moving towards her sidearm. But instead of a threat, a figure emerged from the shadows, a young woman with a haunted look in her eyes. "Are you Detective Anders?" the woman asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" Sarah replied, her tone gentle yet authoritative. The woman hesitated for a moment before speaking. I think I saw something last night, near the house. Something strange." Sarah's interest piqued. She motioned for the woman to continue, her mind racing with the possibility of a breakthrough in the case. "It was late," the woman began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was walking my dog through the woods when I saw lights flickering in the windows of the old house. I thought I saw someone moving inside." Sarah listened intently, jotting down notes as the woman recounted her experience. Could this witness have seen the killer, or perhaps an accomplice? It was a lead, albeit a vague one, but in cases like this, any lead was worth pursuing. "Thank you for coming forward," Sarah said sincerely. "Your information could be very helpful to our investigation." The woman nodded, her expression still troubled. "I hope you catch whoever did this. No one deserves to die like that." Sarah watched as the woman disappeared back into the darkness of the woods, her thoughts returning to the task at hand. The murder in the old abandoned house had unleashed a torrent of fear and speculation in the community. As she turned back towards the house, the distant howl of a lone wolf echoed through the trees, a haunting reminder that in the depths of the forest, secrets lingered, waiting to be unearthed. In the days that followed, Detective Sarah Anders and her team tirelessly pursued every lead in their quest to unravel the mystery of the murder in the old abandoned house. The witness's account of flickering lights and movement near the scene had sparked a renewed sense of urgency in their investigation. Interviews with neighbors revealed a tapestry of rumors and suspicions woven over years of the house's abandonment. Some spoke of strange figures glimpsed through the windows on moonlit nights, while others swore they heard voices carried on the wind, a chorus of the forgotten echoing through the woods. Sarah sifted through the witness statements, cross-referencing timelines and searching for inconsistencies. She knew that amidst the ghost stories and local folklore, there lay kernels of truth that could lead them to the killer. Forensic analysis yielded little at first, but as they combed through the evidence painstakingly collected from the crime scene, a breakthrough emerged. A latent fingerprint, barely visible on a dusty surface, matched a record in the database, a record belonging to someone with a history of violence and ties to the victim. With a name and a face to focus on, Sarah and her team intensified their efforts. They traced the suspect's movements, piecing together a timeline that intersected with the night of the murder. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras provided glimpses of a figure lurking in the shadows, their features obscured but their movements deliberate. As the net closed in, tensions in the town reached a fever pitch. Whispers of arrests and justice spread through the community like wildfire, mingling with the ever-present undercurrent of fear that had gripped them since the crime was discovered. One rainy afternoon, Sarah stood outside the suspect's residence, her breath visible in the cold autumn air. With backup discreetly positioned nearby, she knocked on the door, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The door creaked open, revealing the suspect, a man with haunted eyes and a demeanor that spoke of guilt and resignation. Sarah introduced herself calmly but firmly, informing him of his rights as she stepped inside. The man offered no resistance, his shoulders slumped in defeat. In the dimly lit room, Sarah's gaze swept over the sparse furnishings, a stark contrast to the cluttered chaos of the abandoned house where the murder had taken place. She saw traces of a life lived on the margins, of choices made and consequences ignored. As they transported the suspect back to the station, Sarah reflected on the twists and turns of the investigation. The murder in the old abandoned house had tested her resolve and stretched the limits of her team's abilities. Yet, in the end, it was their dedication to seeking justice that had prevailed. Back at the station, amidst the clatter of typewriters and the soft murmur of officers at work, Sarah sat down to review the case file once more. The suspect's confession filled in the final pieces of the puzzle, detailing a tragic tale of betrayal and revenge that had culminated in violence. Outside, the old abandoned house stood silent and watchful, its secrets laid bare by the relentless pursuit of truth. The woods whispered with the echoes of closure, a bittersweet melody that spoke of justice served and lives forever altered by the events that unfolded within its shadowy confines. In the days that followed the suspect's confession, Detective Sarah Anders and her team meticulously prepared their case for trial. The suspect, Thomas Crane, a once-respected member of the community fallen into despair, had admitted to his role in the murder of Jonathan Hayes, a local businessman with whom he had a long-standing feud. As Sarah pored over the details of the case file, she couldn't shake the haunting image of the old abandoned house and the profound impact the murder had on the tight-knit town. The trial loomed ahead, promising to bring closure to a community still grappling with the shock and disbelief of such a violent crime in their midst. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation on the day of the trial. Sarah sat at the prosecution's table, her gaze steady as she listened to witness testimonies and presented evidence meticulously gathered by her team. The air was thick with tension, emotions running high as the truth of what had transpired in that forsaken house emerged. Witness after witness took the stand, recounting their memories of the victim and their impressions of the suspect. The defense attempted to cast doubt, painting Thomas Crane as a man driven to desperation by circumstances beyond his control. But Sarah's evidence was damning. A timeline of events, forensic analysis, and the chilling confession that left no room for doubt. As the trial reached its climax, Sarah rose to deliver her closing argument. She spoke with conviction, her words resonating through the hushed courtroom. She painted a vivid picture of Jonathan Hayes, a pillar of the community whose life had been cut short by senseless violence. She spoke of justice not just for the victim, but for the town that had been shaken to its core. The jury deliberated for hours, weighing the evidence presented before them. Sarah waited with a mix of apprehension and determination, knowing that the outcome would shape not only the fate of the suspect, but also the future of those affected by the tragedy. Finally, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty of murder in the first degree. Thomas Crane sat stoically as the judge pronounced the sentence, his fate sealed by the decisions he had made in a moment of rage and despair. Outside the courthouse, the town breathed a collective sigh of relief mingled with sorrow. The murder in the old abandoned house had left scars that would linger, but the resolution brought a measure of closure. Sarah accepted the gratitude of the community with humility, knowing that her team's dedication had made a difference. As she drove away from the courthouse, the fading light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the road ahead. In the rearview mirror, the silhouette of the old abandoned house loomed in the distance, a reminder of the darkness that had briefly gripped their lives. But Sarah also saw something else, a glimmer of hope amidst the shadows. The wheels of justice had turned, bringing a measure of peace to a town haunted by tragedy. And as she navigated the winding roads back to her own life, she knew that the memories of the murder in the old abandoned house would linger, a testament to the resilience of those who sought truth and justice in the face of darkness. In the aftermath of the trial, Detective Sarah Anders found herself reflecting on the case more deeply than usual. The murder in the old abandoned house had touched something raw and primal within the community and within herself. As she drove back to her apartment, the weight of the investigation and its resolution settled heavily on her shoulders. The old house seemed to haunt her thoughts. Its decrepit facade and the secrets buried within its walls had become a metaphor for the hidden depths of human nature she confronted daily in her work. Cases like these reminded her why she had chosen to be a detective, to seek justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves, and to bring closure to families torn apart by violence. Arriving home, Sarah shed her coat and poured herself a glass of wine, trying to unwind but finding her mind drawn back to the trial. She replayed the testimony, the emotions in the courtroom, and the finality of the verdict. Despite the closure the trial brought, there was a lingering sadness, an understanding that no verdict could fully heal the wounds left by such a tragic loss. In the days that followed, Sarah threw herself into new cases, trying to bury the memories of the old abandoned house beneath the weight of fresh investigations. But the echoes of that case lingered, a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that could reside even in the most unsuspecting corners. One evening, several weeks after the trial, Sarah received a letter at her desk. It was a simple thank you note from a member of the community, a gesture of gratitude for her dedication and compassion during the investigation. The words touched her deeply, reminding her that despite the often grim realities of her job, there were moments of connection and gratitude that made it all worthwhile. As time passed, the old abandoned house faded from the headlines, replaced by new stories and new challenges. But for Sarah, the lessons learned from the murder in those decaying walls stayed with her. They strengthened her resolve to pursue justice relentlessly, even when faced with darkness and uncertainty. Years later, Sarah sat in her office, a seasoned detective with countless cases behind her. The old abandoned house had long since been demolished, replaced by new development in the expanding town. But its memory remained etched in her mind, a reminder of the complexities of human nature and the enduring quest for truth. Occasionally, Sarah would drive by the site where the house once stood, a habit born of curiosity and a quiet reverence for the past. She would pause for a moment, reflecting on how that case had shaped her career and her understanding of justice. As she looked out the window of her office, watching the bustling city beyond, Sarah felt a sense of fulfillment. The murder in the old abandoned house had been more than just another case. It had been a journey of discovery, both professionally and personally. And as she continued her work, she knew that each new case would bring its own challenges and its own lessons, driven by the enduring belief that justice, though sometimes elusive, was always worth fighting for. Years had passed since the murder in the old abandoned house, yet Detective Sarah Anders still carried the weight of that case with her. It had left an indelible mark on her career, shaping her approach to investigations and deepening her understanding of the human psyche. In the intervening years, Sarah had risen through the ranks of the department, earning a reputation for her meticulousness and unwavering dedication to justice. She had solved numerous cases, each presenting its own set of challenges and complexities, but none quite like the murder that had unfolded in the shadows of the ancient woods. The town had moved on, as towns often do, its people gradually letting go of the fear and uncertainty that had gripped them in the aftermath of the crime. The old abandoned house had become a distant memory, a footnote in local history overshadowed by new developments and the passage of time. Sarah, however, found herself revisiting the case in quieter moments. She would often find herself staring at the photograph of the crime scene, the image of the victim forever frozen in time. It was a stark reminder of the stakes involved in her work, a reminder that behind every case file, there were lives shattered and families forever altered. One rainy afternoon, Sarah received a call from an unfamiliar number. She answered, her curiosity piqued. On the other end of the line was a voice she hadn't heard in years, a voice tinged with hesitation and regret. "Detective Anders," the voice began tentatively. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Thomas Crane's sister." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Thomas Crane, the man convicted of the murder in the old abandoned house. She remembered his stoic demeanor during the trial, the weight of his confession, and the haunting silence of the courtroom as the verdict was delivered. "How can I help you?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the flood of memories threatening to overwhelm her. There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if Thomas Crane's sister was gathering her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was strained with emotion. I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you did during the investigation and the trial. I know my brother's actions were unforgivable, but knowing that justice was served brought some measure of closure to our family." Sarah listened, her heart heavy with empathy. She had seen firsthand the ripple effects of Thomas Crane's actions, the shattered lives, the unanswered questions, and the scars that would never fully heal. Yet, here was someone reaching out, seeking solace in the aftermath of tragedy. "I appreciate you saying that," Sarah replied softly. "I hope you and your family have found some peace." There was a moment of silence before Thomas Crane's sister spoke again, her voice wavering slightly. "I also wanted to ask if you could meet me. There's something I need to tell you. Something important." Sarah hesitated, her mind racing with the possibilities. She knew that reopening old wounds could be painful, but she also understood the importance of closure, both for the victims and their loved ones. "Of course," Sarah finally said, her voice resolute. "Where would you like to meet?" They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town later that week. As Sarah sat across from Thomas Crane's sister, she studied the woman's face, etched with years of sorrow and regret. There was a nervous energy in the air, a shared understanding that this meeting held significance beyond words. "I don't expect you to forgive my brother," Thomas Crane's sister began, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "But there's something you should know." She proceeded to recount a series of events leading up to the night of the murder, details that had never come to light during the investigation. Sarah listened intently, her mind racing as pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex than anyone had realized. As Sarah walked away from the cafe that evening, the weight of the new information settled on her shoulders. The murder in the old abandoned house had been a tragedy with no easy answers, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and unanswered questions. Yet, in that moment, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that even in the darkest corners, truth and justice could prevail. She returned to her apartment that night, the rain tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. Sitting at her desk, she opened a fresh case file, ready to dive into the next challenge awaiting her. The murder in the old abandoned house would forever be a part of her story, a reminder of the complexities of human nature and the enduring quest for justice that defined her career. And as she studied the details of the new case, Sarah carried with her the lessons learned from the past, a steadfast commitment to uncovering the truth, no matter how elusive it may seem, and a belief that every investigation held the potential to bring closure and healing to those touched by tragedy.